Hello and welcome to the Career Success Podcast. I'm Jason Connolly. If you're a regular listener, it's great to have you back. But if you're new, welcome to the show. In this series, every week, we speak to the biggest names in business all across the globe. We talk about their career stories, the lessons learned, how they overcome challenges, and what success habits they practice. Practical advice to help you in your career. If you have a passion for business, then this is the podcast for you. In this episode, I'm joined by Tom Caretti from San Diego in California. Tom is an industry influencer, a coach, a speaker, an educator, and a mentor. He is the author of C-Suite and Beyond, Unlock Your Full Potential with 4 Keys of Leadership. His approach to leadership comes from a lifetime of international experience. His servant leadership principles are time-proven and based on biblical foundations. He is down to earth and able to strike a balance between business challenges and common sense solutions. His motivational and engaging style will leave you with practical and applicable solutions that you can put into practice. Tom, thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me halfway across the world.
It's an absolute delight. And, I don't really quite know where to start with you, your background. There's so much to it. Tell us about your career. Kind of walk us through the highlights. You've been a senior executive for Colgate, Philips Electrics, many companies, not just in the US, but all over the world. So there's a lot to unpack in a short amount of time. But tell us about you.
Yeah, it's been a fun ride working all over the world. As I like to say it, I've lived in 6 countries and I've worked on every single continent, with the exception of Antarctica. And I don't think I want to work in Antarctica. That's a little bit too cold for me. But I always, 20 years ago, when people asked me that question, I would dwell in a lot of details about business accomplishments. And now I say, look, I'm a proud father of 3 girls, and my legacy should be determined not by how many companies I bought or sold or turned around or made profitable, or how much money I made for people or myself. It's more how my kids turn out. Talking about leadership, when you're talking about mentoring, or when you're talking about coaching, if you can't get your family in order, then probably you can't get your business in order.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting. So how did you get to the point of becoming a senior executive? What was the journey to getting up to that level?
Part of it was luck. Part of it was, being in the right place at the right time. Part of it was, just divine blessing. But the one thing that has been common throughout my career is that I always am prepared to grow. I'm never standing still. I'm always preparing to grow. I'm always getting myself a little bit better. So the fact is, when I got my first expat assignment, which was back in 1991, it took me a 2-year journey to get that assignment. I just happened to be working in corporate headquarters and was exposed to a lot of senior executives. And I had a great mentor who was my boss, Frank. And Frank and I decided together, as part of my career plan, was to present to 4 of the senior executive VPs at that company at the time. That was our plan. And when I went into the first presentation at a little bit lower level, the plan kind of blew up because I talked so fast with it, such an accent, and it was such a rapid words, like firing left and right, that people in the room couldn't understand what I was saying. So Frank said, "All right, well, time for speech lessons." So I went to a woman, Eileen, and she was great, and she helped me with my speech, slow it down, and being a little bit more comprehensive. And then I went back into a few more presentations, and over a period of 2 years, I did get to present to 4 of the senior executive VPs at that company. And just happened at that particular time in 91, the Iron Curtain came down. And that's where, a little bit of luck and faith comes into it, because out of 22,000 employees, 4 spoke Hungarian. But the preparation of 2 years of really presenting to executive VPs, they knew my name, they knew my face, and like every Fortune 100 company at the time, looked in their database and who spoke those native languages in Eastern Europe. And I was one of 4 that spoke Hungarian. So everybody just met me and said, "Okay, we'll send Tom." So, it's preparation. It's, as they say, if you're starting to prepare for an opportunity and when the opportunity arises, then you missed it. So you have to prepare well in
Mhm.
advance.
That's really interesting. Well, when you say you had these speech lessons, what was you learning in those lessons?
Well, it's self awareness. Self awareness to say, don't let just words come flying out of your mouth because they come flying out of your brain. Just take and what seems like an eternity inside somebody's mind. 5 seconds. It's really not a lot of time when you're having a conversation. So just slow down and let other people's mind catch up to what you have to say, and let your mind catch up to what you have to say. So it's just self-awareness, because when you think you're speaking and you're hearing yourself inside your head speak, it seems natural to you. But then when you watch yourself on video and
Hmm.
you get feedback, it's a very different thing.
That's really interesting. What made you think to go and do that at the time? Was it something feedback you'd had, or was it your own sort of self reflection? What made you go out and get that training?
It was just, being in a meeting and firing off a question to one of the senior executives, where the executive looked at me and kind of with a blank stare on his face, and just don't think he understood the question. And it was really after that meeting that I sat down with my mentor, and we said, he was just brutally honest with me. He said, "Tom, we need to get you work on your speech, because you're just, you're never going to get anywhere if you keep speaking that way." So it was just me
Mm.
receiving feedback from somebody that cared about me and was honest enough to tell me what I needed.
I guess being a strong communicator, that's well, obviously, I lead a company myself and I know this, but that is so important when leading teams, and especially when I can't imagine how busy you was in some of these roles. It must have been, pretty intense. So, time is of the essence, I guess.
Well, the other thing that I learned over the years is, speaking of communication, everyone develops their communication skills and starts off with, and I probably think 75% of people are in that bucket, they are informing, right? So I have a point of
Mm.
view. I want to convince you of my point of view, so I inform you. And business presentations are informative. Most communications are, people inform, one person is informing the
Mm.
other. And then a more advanced form of communication is when actually a dialogue takes place. So now people are beginning to listen to the other side. They're beginning to listen to
Mm.
their point of view. They're trying to communicate and form common grounds that they can build on. So that's the second level of communication. And 15-20% of the folks who are in business or otherwise become masters of communications, right? And then
Mm.
there's a handful of people who understand that the true form of communication is connecting with you. And you connect with people not
Mm.
through words, you connect with people through their hearts. So now it's no longer trying to convince somebody that your point of view is correct. Now it's not even listening to the other person, but it's, why are they saying that? What's the underlying motive
Perspective.
that they're saying? Yeah, perspective. So once you understand how to communicate with people, and once you understand how to connect with people, and understand those emotional connections, and that can happen from the
Mm.
stage, that
Mm.
can happen in the conference room, then you can really start moving.
Yeah, this you make a lot of really, really, really good points, and you can tell what you're saying. You're someone that's been there, done that, and worn the t-shirt. That's it's evident in what you're saying. I believe in a lot of what you're saying. I think this is the main reason why I recruit people every day for a living, and one of the main companies lose good people is because they don't see their perspective. They don't see things through their eyes. And, if you look through the eyes of the beholder, then what I'm trying to get at, Tom, is I think you make some very valid points. And I think perspective is everything. And that's one thing you've got to understand. You've got to be able to see things from other people's perspective. And that's, there's nothing that annoys me more than when you see a big company not look after the perspective of people at every level of the company. But that's why you go into some shops and some businesses. And we have a shop, I don't know if you've heard it over here. We have a shop called John Lewis, and it's a partnership. And you
Mhm.
go in, and everyone is happy and has a voice and feels engaged. So, there's good examples of it. So tell us, obviously, you've gone in and you sort of have turned companies around. Do you feel that because I don't know what it's like in the senior executive world, but if you have one wrong project that you go to or you're brought in and it doesn't go right, is that kind of a career sort of ender for you? You go into a company and you aren't seen to turn that company around or achieve what you need to do from being brought in.
Well, look, in the expatriate world, I mean, the reason companies assign you to be an expat because you're a good at fixing problems, and I was good at fixing problems. So when they sent me into the company, my role, obviously if the company was doing great, they wouldn't send me in. They'd sent me in there to make it better. So you have about a 3-year window, and in
Mm.
three years, you either have fixed the problem or you haven't fixed the problem. If you haven't fixed the problem, you got fired. If you have fixed the problem, then they want you to go on and fix a bigger and better problem.
Was there any problem that you couldn't fix? Was there ever a challenge you turned up and you thought, oh, this isn't going to work?
Well, if you're asking me if I ever got fired, yes, I did.
Ah, I don't want to
So,
focus on the negatives, Tom. I want to focus on the positives. But
well,
you obviously learned a lesson. Can we talk about the negative, or are we allowed?
yeah, yeah. Well, I
I
mean,
suppose we can make our own rules, Tom, can't we? In this episode.
look, here's the thing, and you've asked so many questions that I was going to comment on another one. So remind me to talk a little about culture and circle back to that example that you talked about, that company. But let me answer this question
Sure.
first. And
Hmm.
simply put, look, if you haven't failed, that means you haven't tried. So failure is a part of life.
Hmm.
Failure was part of my life. And if I haven't failed and a bunch of times, then I wouldn't be where I am today. So the important thing is learning about failure, right? And the other important thing about failure is just accept that it's going to happen. And
Hmm.
most of us over exaggerate failure, right? We say, oh, when I first got fired from my job, I was shocked. I was just devastated. I spent 14 years with a company, and my whole identity was wrapped up in that company and that job. So when I got fired, I didn't know what to do with myself, and it took me about 3 or 4 months to land my next gig, and it took me about 2 or 3 weeks to come to reality and grips to say, okay, well, I got fired. So what? I'm still the same person. I still have the same knowledge base. I can still do the same things. I'm still a dad. Still a husband. I'm still this and that, and okay, that was just the job. So now I become a free agent and I go to the highest bidder. And I started to learn how to market
Hmm.
myself and how to create a brand for myself. So I became a brand. I became a brand of a turnaround specialist in emerging markets. And, that kind of put
Hmm.
me to a whole another plateau in my career. But once I accepted the fact that, okay, it's not me, it's just a job. And I learned why I got fired. I mean, if you want to go into that, I can give you, a quick 5 minute, overview of what happened there and why it happened.
There's so many things I want to ask you. I want to know it all. I think you're making some really interesting and valid points, which I think, so many people can listen to what you're saying and take these lessons away. So when you go to these companies, because obviously you're a brand, so are you assessing these companies if you want to go in there? Because, it might tarnish your brand if you go into a company where you can't turn it around, or kind of going in blind. What's the process of acquiring these positions, so to speak?
Well, look, I was fortunate enough and blessed enough that people came looking for me, because again, I created a brand for myself and I was recognized in emerging market as a turnaround specialist. So, but I also was very founded in my values. So I can't tell you how many cigarette companies wanted me to work for them. And I can't tell you how many liquor
Mm.
companies wanted me to work for them. And I
Oh,
just said, look,
interesting.
that's something I don't want to do. You know, I had a lot of companies that wanted me to go to China. And I just said, look, I'm not going to drag my family to China. So, there's certain things that I will not do. So I was, but I did emerging markets, Latin America and Central and Eastern Europe, Middle East. So
Mm.
I did all those. So there was some confines that I would put on myself. But it wasn't so much about the status of the company. I think it was more about the industry. Was it, did it agree with my values and my, ethics, and the
Mm.
ones that didn't, I wouldn't pursue.
That's really interesting, and I imagine there were some liquor companies prepared to pay you quite a substantial amount of money to come and
Well,
help them with their products. But no, I think it's good, and I think you've got to know when to say no. I think being able to say no in business is just as important as at times. A lot of the time you do say yes, but yeah, no, I think that's great. So culture. Let's revert back to culture and talk about your experiences, or well, I guess, of cultures. But I've always said as well, when it comes to culture, I personally think it's very hard to change a culture, and I think you can copy everything in a business, but a culture is, it's very difficult to change a culture when there's a culture there. So let's talk about the subject of culture because it's interesting.
So, in my four keys to leadership success, I mean, the number one is culture. And all great
Mm,
organizations have a culture. And an example you used before, where you said, people are in this company and they may not like being there, or people are not valued in the company. I mean, that all those comments that you made earlier really are comments about a culture.
mm,
And the one thing that I will say is every company has a culture, every single one. Now, you may
mm,
have not, maybe the leadership of that company was not intentional in making a culture happen, but by default, a culture will breed itself inside of an organization. So I
mm,
always say to leaders, you might as well spend a lot of time designing and implementing and living that culture, because if you don't, you'll end up with one anyway, but you may not like it. So in that example that you used again, every person, and whether you're an attorney or you're a secretary or a
mm,
janitor or you're CEO, it doesn't matter what you are. If you're going into an organization, try to understand, and it's so easy today because everybody has a website. I mean, 50, 60 years
mm,
ago, websites didn't exist, so you couldn't really research this. You had to do a lot more digging. But now it's so easy, just clicking on any company's website, and their culture and their values should be evident to you. If you don't
mm,
see a culture or clear values outlined on a website, that's a big yellow flag, right? If you
mm,
also see values in a culture that doesn't really agree with you, don't even take the interview, because I can tell you when you do join that organization, you're gonna feel you're gonna really feel out of place.
mm,
It's not going to
mm,
be for you, and it's just a matter of months or a year before they either fire you or quit because you just don't belong in there. So
mm,
culture is fundamental, and not only is culture on a website, not only is culture pinned on pinups on poster boards and stuff, but it's a living organism inside of an organization where everybody has to breathe it,
mm.
everybody has to walk it, everybody has to talk it. Otherwise, it's not really culture. Otherwise, just slogans.
Yeah, I really agree with what you're saying. It's a really funny thing of culture as well because it's totally not tangible a lot of the time, and it's people's emotions. And I think what you said at the start of the show about kind of perspective. But we've in my company we've got a really good, hardworking, good vibe culture. And there's a lot of bad cultures in recruitment where, as an industry, oh, it's notorious for companies pitting people against one another and all sorts. But if a company has a bad culture, how do you think, if you're going into a company that has a bad culture, how do you change that?
You change it from the top. Right? You have
Mm,
to address the elephant in the room. Right. So when I took over a company in the mid '90s, they had a what I would call a panic culture. They were constantly in panic. They were always behind the numbers. Everybody was constantly panicking, and it was chaos. That's probably the best way to describe that culture that was in the company. And when I came into the organization, I recognized that really there's either a lack of culture or really the wrong culture, and you have to change that. You have to change that by sitting down with a bunch of people in a room and say, okay, culture starts with values. What are our values?
mm,
Right? Is respecting each other's opinion, is that a value that we all cherish? Okay. Is supporting each other, is that a culture that is that a value that we all cherish? Yeah. So then, rather than people pointing fingers at each other, panicking, then they start supporting each other. They start respecting the
mm,
opinions in the room. They stop arguing. So you build a culture by identifying common values. And I do workshops for companies, and we'll go into a company and we'll put about 50 quote unquote values on the wall and say, okay, well, pick four, and then if it's one is not on the wall, then write down your own. So everybody pick five values that are common, that's value, to them, that's their personal values. And then if you have 10, 15, 20 people in a
mm.
room, then you kind of say, all right, well, what are all those values that all these people have in common? Because everybody put down five, so what's the common theme? So over a number of iterations, you go through
Mm.
identifying five or six values that everybody in the room agrees with. And it sounds like a really impossible
Okay.
exercise, but the fact is, I've done it so many times. You can find five or six values that everybody agrees in the room.
Yeah.
right? So that's your
Do
foundation,
you
and then
think it's essential that a company has the actual sketched out values? Because my company, but there's 25 of us, we don't have company values, but I think people know what the company values are. I think it's quite clear. Do you think it's important for a company to actually? Because I think there's so many values that we expect from people. I couldn't imagine slimming it to five. We expect people to be a certain way, or do you think people need to, be able to see that visually?
the short answer is yes. I mean, the good news for your company is it seems like even though nobody wrote them down, it seems like you guys all share common values. So on the opposite of that, if you write them down but you don't share them and you don't live them, then it doesn't do you any good either. But capturing them is good because as people leave the organization or new people join the organization, it's good to have that common thread to say, what are our values? So it's in a bucket. I mean, look, think about it this way. A culture for an organization is equivalent to a person's character, right? So you have a character, I have a character, and our characters are different, right?
Mm,
You have slightly different values than I do. I'm sure we don't have the same identical values, but both of us have values. And five is a good number. Maybe six, maybe seven, but it's not 20. So those are some values that you have, and those are and that's what defines you, and that's what defines me. So who I am is made up of my values and the things that I do with those values. That defines my character. And that's the same
mm.
thing for an organization. An organization's character is their culture.
Do you think that so a lot of the time when you got these bad cultures, do you think have you had to go in and kind of do a management clear out? Because if the management aren't on side, then it's you're fighting a losing battle, aren't
Well, absolutely. Here's an example. One of the stops that I did was that I used to work for a company called Bankiser. Bankiser was a
you? Mm,
detergent company, which was the part of the John Bankiser family out of Germany, and they were one of the stars of that industry, basically growing at double digits, and in the household cleaning industry, growing at 17, 18,
mm,
20% was unheard of. Right? And there was a different company, which is called Reckitt and Coleman, which is an English company, and they were stagnating. They were a much bigger company than Bankiza was, but they were stagnating. They weren't growing. So what happened? The companies merged, right? The companies merged, and the reason they merged was because the board of directors of Reckitt and Coleman, basically said, "Well, we're not growing," and Bankiza was looking to grow and looking to acquire companies, so it became what I would call a minority shareholder takeover, right? So what happened was the two companies merged, and even though Bankiz was the smaller company, the C-suite of the new company was the C-suite of Bankiza. So everybody was,
mm,
most of the people that were high flyers in Brecken and Coleman were ousted. And the reason we were ousted because the company was stagnating, it wasn't growing, it wasn't healthy. So
mm.
they merged the two companies, and they brought the culture over from Bankiza, which was an entrepreneur, take no prisoners type of mentality, and that ran the company. That culture ran the company going forward. So you're
There
100%
must
right.
have been fireworks merging the two companies together with opposing values.
Well, it wasn't fireworks in the sense that any roadblock from the old company,
Mm.
they were ousted anyway. And oddly enough, a lot of people from Recking and Coleman, they said, "We love this. We've been waiting for this forever. We couldn't stand the old way of doing it.
Oh,
We
they were
absolutely love
embracing it with open arms. Come in, we
Yeah,
want you."
exactly. So
That sounds like a nice easy merger. So, kind of moving kind of on to what you do now. You obviously do a lot of work with mentoring and helping people, which I guess isn't kind of too dissimilar to what you were doing before, but you're doing it for many different people now. So, what do you tend to see? Is there kind of like a typical thing that you find that companies aren't doing right at the moment, or do you see the same set of challenges come up again and again, or is it quite varied?
Well, look, every situation is a little bit different, but here's the thing: if a company is healthy and it's growing and it's well led, then they probably don't bring me in, right? Because if everything is great, then they've already figured out that they have to continuously grow. They probably have a strong vision. They probably have a strong culture. They probably put together a great diverse team. So there's little I can do there. Where I can add value is where a company's stuck. They're not really growing. maybe they're into it 6, 7, 8 years, and they are now starting to hit some growth barriers. So for me, it always boils down to the five things, and that's why I wrote the book. It's
Mm.
culture, it's vision, it's strategic growth, it's a diverse team, and it's connecting. Those are the five things that I talk about all the time. And whenever I see an organization that's struggling, one or more of those indicators is not working properly. Right? So they may not have a clear vision.
Mm.
Maybe they change visions every 3 or 4 years, which is a no-no. Maybe they have a strategic growth that doesn't really align with their vision, so they're always constantly distracted by the latest shiny object. Maybe they don't have a really
Mm.
well-balanced, diverse team. So what I found is in all organizations, including the ones that I led, and including ones that are that I know people are leading and they're successful, is those four principles are always at work. And if the company is not
Mm.
successful, then that's one of those principles is not at work.
And honestly, there's so many good listens in the book, and I can't believe it's available for $4.99 on your website. What a bargain! And if people do want to go to it, it is leadershipdisciples.com. Go to purchase the book, $4.99, and you have the key to it sounds like a very happy, profitable, and well running organization. There we
Or you
go.
can, or you can just go to Amazon. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble. So it's a whole bunch of places.
It's everywhere. Fantastic. Kind of sort of talking about kind of advice, it's obviously a challenging time at the moment for any business owner. I suppose even Amazon, they're probably struggling to keep up with warehouse builds. It's every company, no matter whether you're on the good end or the bad end, there's probably challenges. Honestly, they don't seem to stop putting adverts out on TV here. I don't think they can get enough delivery people. It's challenge first world problems that. So to sort of what advice would you kind of give to people? I know you've spoken about a lot of different things in the book, the different principles, and I'd love to unpack even more of it. But our time together is starting to come to an end, which is a great shame because I'm really enjoying this episode. But if it goes on too long, I will be in trouble. So tell me, what advice would you give to, I know this is generic, obviously, but, what would you say to business owners at the moment? Let's talk about people SME size. It's not an easy time to have, a small or medium sized business. What would the Tom Coetzee advice be?
Been asked the similar question a couple of times over the last few
Mm.
podcasts, and I'll be consistent with my answer. Not so much for the company, but for the individual. So
Mm.
I tell each individual, look, draw three circles, and those three circles intersect in one place. I think it's called a Venn diagram. Put a question in each one of those circles. So the first
Mm.
question is, who are you? The second question is, what are you passionate about? And the third question is, what are you good at? Right. So if you
Mm.
ask those three questions to me, who am I? I'm a servant leader. What am I passionate about? I'm passionate about making other people better. I'm passionate about adding value to people and organizations. And what am I good at? I'm pretty good at mentoring and leading. So where those three circles intersect, that's where you should be living your life. So many people doing things that they're not passionate about just for a paycheck. Don't do it. Life is too short.
Mm.
Some people think they're good at something, but they're not really good at it. They just think they're good at it. Just listen to other people's feedback, and maybe if you're not good at something, you should be. And look, if you don't know who
Mm.
you are, then you got a whole big question that you got to. That's the first one you got to answer. Is who are you?
I think that's really interesting advice, and I think what you say about people actually, maybe thinking they're good at something, but maybe they're not. But again, I guess perspective. It's ask other people's perspective. So there's many lessons throughout this episode, which all kind of tie nicely back into one another, which I really like. Tom, if people want to connect with you, or again, if you do want to buy the book, where can people go to connect with you?
The good news is my last name, Caresti, is extremely unique. There's not a lot of Carestis in the world. So if you just Google Caresti, you'll find my website again, C-Suite and Beyond. You go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble. You can find the book there, either in Kindle version, hard copy, or paperback. So Caresti.com. Even if you misspell it, it'll come up with me somewhere there.
And you taught me a valuable lesson. There is a silent Z, Koretsky. I'll just spell it. If anyone wants to find out more about Tom, you can go to www.KERESZTI.com. Tom, thank you so much for joining me on this episode.
Well, thanks for having me. Have a great Sunday. God bless.
That was Tom Koretsky. This is the Career Success Podcast. I'm Jason Connolly. Until next time, goodbye.